దూర విద్యా విధానంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ఓపెన్ యూనివర్సిటీ దేశంలోనే మొట్టమొదటి సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం. దాదాపు 2.5 దశాబ్దాలుగా దూర విద్యా విధానం ద్వారా కంప్యూటర్ కోర్సును అనుసంధానం చేస్తూ బీఏ, బీకామ్, బీఎస్సీ డిగ్రీ కోర్సులను అందిస్తోంది. పోస్ట్ గ్రాడ్యుయేషన్ స్థాయి, డిగ్రీ, డిప్లొమా స్థాయి కోర్సులను ఔత్సాహికులైన విద్యార్థులకు అందిస్తోంది. డెవలప్మెంట్ స్టడీస్లో సెంటర్ ఫర్ ఎకనామిక్స్ అండ్ సోషల్ స్టడీస్ ద్వారా ఎంఫిల్, పీహెచ్డీతో పాటు విశ్వవిద్యాలయమే స్వయంగా దూర విద్యా విధాన అంశంపైన పీహెచ్డీ వంటి పరిశోధన కోర్సులు ప్రవేశపెట్టింది. రాష్ట్ర వ్యాప్తంగా సుమారు 4.5 లక్షల మంది విద్యార్థులు ఈ విశ్వవిద్యాలయం నుంచి ఉన్నత విద్యావకాశాలు పొందుతున్నారు. డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ సార్వత్రిక విశ్వవిద్యాలయం స్థానికంగా స్వయం బోధనా పద్ధతిలో ముద్రణ రూపంలో రూపొందించిన కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అందిస్తోంది. కోర్స్ మెటీరియల్ అధ్యయనానికి సహకరించే విధంగా రేడియో, టెలివిజన్ పాఠ్యాంశాల ఆధారంగా కార్యక్రమాలు ప్రసారం చేస్తోంది. అధ్యయన కేంద్రాల ద్వారా ఏర్పాటు చేసే సలహా సంసర్గ తరగతులు, సైన్స్ ప్రాక్టికల్ సౌకర్యాలు విద్యార్థులకు స్వయం అధ్యయనానికి ఒక చక్కటి అవకాశం. ఇవి విద్యార్థి సమీపంలో ఉండే అధ్యయన కేంద్రం నుంచే పొందొచ్చు.
A very good afternoon to our beloved audience and hearty welcome to the teleconferencing programs of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. Today's topic is very familiar and the one which touches almost everyone's life in one way or the other. It is about liberalization, privatization and globalization. It is also known as LPG in its short form. Normally, it is said that the world has become a small village now. And probably this is one way of describing the benefits of globalization. And friends, you probably would agree that we need money, all of us need money because that is the medium of exchange. And how do we get money? That is by work. And how do we get work? It is by opportunities. So that means there is a link between money, work and opportunities. And probably you must have heard your elders or parents saying to you that in their time there were very few opportunities. And you are very lucky to be born in an era of opportunities. That is one way of describing the benefits of liberalization. And the world over, there are shifts towards lesser government involvement in the field of business. As rightly said by John Moore, the business of government is not to be in business. So this is nothing but putting privatization in a nutshell. Well, Indian economy has come a very long way, and it has an even longer way to go. So to talk about this lucrative topic, we are fortunate to have amongst us two eminent professors from Osmania University. Let me take the honor of introducing them to you. To my left is Professor S.V. Satyanarayana Garu, Dean, Faculty of Commerce, Osmania University, a man with vision, with decades of experience in teaching, research and consultancy, a successful leader with a subtle and humble approach. Thank you, sir. It is a privilege to having you on the panel. To my extreme left is Dr. A. Patrick, Senior Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Osmania University, a renowned teacher. Although young at age, he is tall in his achievements. He is a voracious reader, task-minded and industrious person. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.
We are proud to have you on the board. Friends, before we go into the discussions, let me remind you that this is a teleconferencing program and you can seek your queries from our professors. You can reach us at 040-270-31431, 432-433. So now, without wasting much of our valuable time, let us straight away go into the discussions. Satyanarayana sir, can we ask you about what is liberalization?
If I have to tell the meaning of liberalization in one sentence, liberalization means removal of restrictions on private industry. So, in India there were so many restrictions on industry. For example, where to produce, what to produce, how to produce, when to produce, whom to produce, everything was decided by the government initially. So, this has put the Indian industry in a disadvantageous position, and because of this the government contemplated several measures to remove these restrictions on the private sector, and this is what we call as liberalization. In 1991, in a big scale the reforms were introduced which are known as removal of restrictions on the industry, and in fact it was started early in 1980 when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. But it was not in a systematic way that the liberalization program was undertaken, but in 1991 in a comprehensive manner the restrictions on the industry were removed. One of the important restrictions that we have removed on the private industry were related to delicensing. So, earlier private industry had to take the license from the government to start the unit if the activity is in the list of the government. That list is pruned, and the number of industries for which the license is to be taken by the private industry is drastically cut down. And another important area is where the private sector was not allowed to enter some of the sectors reserved for public sector, and the private sector was allowed to enter these areas also. This is the second type of restriction that we removed. And the third restriction which we had was on the quantum of or the asset size of the unit. So, because of the socialistic pattern of the society which we had, we did not want the private sector to grow beyond a particular size. So, we had put a restriction on the size of the industrial units. So, this was governed by the MRTP Act, and that was also removed. These are the three broad areas in which the restrictions on industry were removed. This is what we call as liberalization.
Thank you so much, sir, for that elaborate explanation on liberalization. Patrick, sir, may we request you to give us an introduction to globalization?
Globalization is integrating the economy of a country with the world economy. Now, normally what we go about with noticing is countries tend to protect their domestic interests, and what they do is they tend to promote exports through a lot of promotional activities, and they try to restrict the imports. And globalization is dismantling of these trade barriers, through which what we go about with saying is this dismantling facilitates flow of goods, services, capital, technology and labor. Now, as the word globalization goes on, it says that you're treating the entire world, as you have rightly pointed out in the beginning, where you said a single village, you're treating the entire world to be a single market. You're trying to break down the barriers that exist between the countries, and this is something wherein you're trying to uplift the standard of living, alleviation of poverty across the world, better utilization of resources. And this is one of the pillars on which the latest policy, or the new industrial policy of 1991, as sir has just said, we talk about LPG, and globalization is one of that important pillars on which the new industrial policy was constituted on.
True, sir. Very well. So, dismantling of barriers is what is globalization, main focus. Thank you, sir. Satyanarayan, sir, may we know about privatization from you, sir?
Privatization has two meanings. In the broader sense, privatization means withdrawal of the state from the lives and activities of the people. Government was involved in the lives and activities of people in many ways. If you want water, you have to depend on government. If you want education, you have to depend on government. If you want health facilities, you have to depend on government. If you want roads, you have to depend on government. So, everything was provided by the government in India for the past so many decades. Privatization is paving the way for the government to move from government controlled economy to private participation, private activity economy, where government restricts its role only to welfare and security of the people, and other activities are left to the initiative of the private sector. This is what we call as privatization in broader sense.
Yes.
But in narrow sense, privatization means handing over or transfer of the government ownership to private parties. So, but to my mind, privatization ultimately paves the way for market economy, where everything is decided by the market and demand and supply will play a big role in deciding everything, in supply of the goods or in pricing, everything demand and supply will play a role. And government has also a role in a privatized context, but the role is limited to regulating the private sector, because left to private sector may indulge in profiteering, and the markets are not very efficient to take care of the pricing and all those issues. So, some sort of regulation is required, and the government will confine itself to regulatory role and leave the initiative for development to private sector. This is what we understand by privatization.
Exactly, sir. Very well explained, sir. That is, Patrick, sir, can we ask you what are the salient features of the industrial policy in 1991, sir?
In our country, we had the first industrial policy that was made in 1947. There was a policy resolution that was made in 56, and there were a lot of changes that had brought in 70s, 80s. As sir was saying, during Rajiv Gandhi's term, a lot of changes had brought in, but to a concrete shape. They say that changes were brought on July the 24th, 1991, where they have gone about pronouncing what is known as the new industrial policy. Now, sir has rightly gone about with saying, when he spoke about liberalization, as to what are the changes that have been brought out. Now, primarily the first one that was there was abolition of this licensing for the industries. Now, from 1947 to 1991, what was believed is there was the license Raj.
Yes.
Now, in this era, what had happened is the industries, when they wanted to start any legal business, they had to go through a lot of rigorous process of getting approvals, multiple organizations they had to approach. Now, all these things was done away, and the restriction was for reasons of safety, security, arms and ammunition, and very few industries needed licensing after this abolition. The next thing is, when sir said about privatization as well, a redefinition of the role of the public sector, that is the PSUs, was taken up. Now, the PSUs were started off with the view that they would involve in industrialization, would go about with creating employment and other things, but over a period of time it was seen that they were not performing things efficiently and in an effective way, and later on they turned out to be a burden to the government rather than being a revenue generator, and the number of industries that were reserved for the public sector was reduced, and many were being privatized. And apart from it, as sir has also said about the role of MRTP. Now, this was something which was to regulate the private sector units, and the asset restriction that was there earlier, that was redefined. SIC units were being identified, and they were being referred to the Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. And FDI, that is a major thing, wherein we had the inflow of FDI through FIIs and others coming into India, and this was a major thing that had happened. And the restriction that was there with the location of industries also underwent a change, as to where the population is not more than 1 million, there is no permission to be taken there, and straight away they can go for it. And there were many changes that were being brought out this way to go about with looking at the things that had existed prior to 91 to come out of that crisis. These changes were being worked out, and people give a lot of attribution to the efforts that have been taken up by the former Prime Minister Narasimha Rao ji and the Finance Minister at that time, Manmohan Singh, who had gone about with bringing these changes, and we see those impact as on today.
Exactly, sir. Very well elaborated. So, these are very huge changes. It's not a small change, a very big change it is. So, Satyanarayan sir, can we know from you, what were those compelling reasons which the government had, because of which there was a huge revamp in the government policy? So, what was the reason? What were the reasons behind liberalizing the Indian economy, sir?
Now, to understand the shift in policy of the government from a controlled economy to a liberalized economy, we have to understand these two settings, and I will take a minute to explain the first setting, where when we attained independence, we inherited very meager infrastructure. Britishers were not interested in developing the infrastructure in India, and whatever the little development that took place, that was only to export the raw material from India to England and import the finished goods from England to India. Except for that, nothing concrete was done by the Britishers. So, we had only 5 public enterprises with 29 crores capital in 1951, and we did not have ports, airports, roads, nothing was there. So, the priority of the government at that time was to concentrate on development of infrastructure. What the government thought was, if the initiative to develop infrastructure is left to the private sector, it may not happen, because private sector is basically interested in profiteering, and they indulge in, they invest in those activities where the gestation period is short and rate of return is high. So, the government thought that the government should take initiative in developing the infrastructure, core industries, basic industries, etc. So, government wanted to develop these things through huge participation from public sector. So, that is how we have developed public sector, and we have limited resources, and we wanted to use those resources judiciously, and for that purpose we wanted to have some control over the usage of resources, and that is the reason why licensing was introduced, so that there is a match between demand and supply. And we were fearing the foreign capital, because we were under the colonial rule and we did not want that to happen again. So, we were skeptical about the foreign capital and those things. So, we did not allow the foreign capital to enter in a big way into the country. So, these are the 3 things that we have put in place. One, less role to private sector and more elaborate role to public sector, and less participation of foreign capital in the development of the country. So, this has resulted in some negative things. The first thing, private sector did not work to the extent to which we expected it to function. So, rate of return was very low, and many public sector undertakings were incurring loss, and there were many reasons for the non-performance of public sector, such as bureaucratic interference and lack of autonomy on the part of the public managers of the public sector, and lack of initiative from the managers of public sector, and there is they are not the owners of the enterprise, and ownership is different from management of the of the enterprise, and so many reasons were there for the failure or not so impressive performance of the public enterprise. That was one thing. The second thing is, we have put so many restrictions on private sector for the judicious use of the resources of the country, and this has not helped the things, and private sector was not growing, and because of MRTP Act, private sector was not reaching the optimum size. So, optimum size is very much required to reduce the cost of production. So, private enterprise were not attaining the optimum size in the country, and the production of the private sector is also curtailed, and they were not allowed to enter some of the fields, and they were not allowed to establish the units at the place at which they would like to establish, and many industries were reserved to small scale units, and like that so many restrictions were there on private sector. So, this has not this has not helped the private sector to produce to the desired extent. And the third thing, when you do not allow the foreign capital to enter the country, so again the foreign technology and foreign investments, they have not come in, and we were not growing at the rate at which we ought to grow. So, many people commented that the India is growing at Hindu rate of growth of 2 to 3%. So, this is the setting, and this has resulted in 3 important things. One, negative consequences of all these things. Yes. The first thing, the government expenditure was more and government revenues were less, and this has resulted in huge fiscal deficits and internal borrowing from the people, and internal debt has gone up, and because we have not allowed the foreign capital into the country, our exports suffered and imports we could not avoid, and that resulted in adverse balance of payment situation. Since we have not allowed the private sector to produce to the desired extent, there was a mismatch between demand and supply, and when there is a mismatch between demand and supply, prices will go up, and that resulted in inflation. And inflation, fiscal deficit, and the adverse balance of payments position and foreign exchange reserves are very low. All these things have forced us to go for liberalizing the situation and initiating reforms to correct these things.
Wonderful, sir. So friends, are you getting connected with us? See, in such a beautiful way sir has explained us as to the compelling reasons. Each one of it is a link. It has a link to the next one. So I hope you are enjoying it and enriching your knowledge. Wonderful, sir. That was a beautiful explanation. Sir Patrick, sir, can you elaborate us on fiscal deficit?
Yeah, it's a reference which Professor Satyanarayana has just made about what this fiscal deficit is all about. Now, it is the gap that exists between the anticipated expenditure and the expected revenues that are there. Now, when there is a gap, what happens is this is an indicator to the government as to what extent of borrowings it has to do, whether it is through internal or the external sources that are there. And as a consequence of this, what happens is the inflationary rates shoot up. And there are different schools of thought. John Maynard Keynes is one of the famous economists, has said that it's good to have this because it prevents the country from getting to recession. But there are other people who said that inflation, once it sets in, to control it becomes a spiraling effect and many other things which are bad for the economy there. So this is basically the gap that exists between the income or the revenues that would be expected by the government and its expenditure. And at times there are unplanned expenditures that are there that creates these gaps, and that leads the government to get into borrowings, and that adds to the woes of the economy around.
Wonderful, sir. Exactly. Normally, you know, friends, you know, understanding fiscal deficit is difficult. In the sense, it's a technical term, and sir has explained it very well in terms of a very lucid kind of explanation. Thank you, sir. Satyanarayan sir, can we know about inflation from you, sir?
Inflation, the meaning of inflation is price rise. If the general price level increases, we call it inflation. So the rate of increase in the prices is what we call as inflation. So it has, there are so many things that contribute to inflation. One of the important things is fiscal deficit, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Patrick. So when the fiscal deficit is very high, the government has to bridge that gap. So sometimes they monetize the deficit. That means the money circulation in the economy will go up. Yeah. So that causes inflation. That is one thing. The second thing is, most important thing to my mind, is the gap between demand and supply. So when the demand is more and supply is less, that results in inflation. And in India, inflation is mostly because of the mismatch between demand and supply. So as we have discussed, the earlier policies of the government resulted in shrinking of supply, because private sector was not contributing much and public sector was not doing at the level to at which it was expected to do, and we were not getting flow of goods and services from other countries, and all these things put so many restraints on or so many constraints on supply. So when supply is less and the demand goes up, automatically it will result in increase in the general price level. So this is one of the important reasons for inflation to my mind. Another important thing which I want to tell is, inflation can broadly be categorized into three. One is creeping inflation, where the inflation grows at a very slowly. That means 0.01, 0.02 like that. So that is not a very dangerous thing, and we can manage that inflation. Sometimes the inflation grows at a very alarming level. That is what we call as galloping inflation. That means inflation jumps from one digit to the other digit, and if the inflation crosses 2-digit mark, it will be very difficult for us to control the inflation. Some of the countries are worst affected because of inflation. In the recent past, we have seen in Zimbabwe, where the inflation rate has gone up to 2000 level, and in Russia and in Argentina. In some of the countries, people refuse to accept the indigenous currency, and they wanted foreign transactions to take place in foreign currency. And one example I quote, where in Russia they printed notes in sheets, and they did not cut the sheets and make the notes into bundles, because they thought that it is waste of time and you have to carry sheets of notes to the market to fetch vegetables, etc., etc. So, inflation is very dangerous if it is not properly managed, and the concern of any government would be to manage the inflation at the reasonable level.
Exactly, sir. In fact, you know, even Indian economy has underwent through high inflation rates. So, you must be able to connect to what is being discussed, and you must have got some inputs in regard to what are the reasons behind the rise of inflation or rise of prices. Thank you so much, sir. Patrick, sir, can we get an insight into BOP crisis, sir?
Yeah. Now, before I get into the crisis part of it, I would like to talk a little on what is this BOP all about. We call it as a balance of payments. Now, this balance of payments is said to be a systematic statement of the economic transactions that are done by one country residents with the world economy. So, you keep a track of the exports and imports in a systematic way, and this is something where we talk about the balance of payment there. Now, the crisis part of it, if you look at what had happened in prior to 1991, we had the balance of payments not in a very bad, not in a good shape from 1885 onwards. It reached a point where it became very severe in 1991. And what we noticed is we had reserves which would go about with enabling us to meet the import demands to an extent of only 3 weeks there. And India were to airlift gold reserves that were there, and it had to be taken to the Bank of England and to Switzerland Bank, and it had to mortgage it with the IMF to raise loans and other things to meet the foreign exchange reserves there. Now, when you look at the overall statement of a balance of payments, it has got 3 components in it. One is the current account balance, second is the capital account balance, and third is the official reserve. Now, when you talk about the current account balance, again it has got 3 things in it. We talk of the balance of visible trade, which is done through products, the balance of invisible trade, which is through services, and the balances because of unilateral transfers that are made between the countries there. The second one that we have is we talk about the capital account balance, and in this we talk about the difference that exists between the inflows of foreign reserves and the outflows of foreign reserves. And the third component, where you talk about the central bank, in our country it is the RBI, the kind of foreign exchange reserves and the gold that it has. Addition of these 3 things makes it the balance of payment statement, as we call it. Now, coming to the crisis part of it, what had happened prior to 1991, there are factors related with economic, political and social reasons which had led to the crisis. In economic, if you go about looking at, for a very long time, as sir was suggesting, because of over dependence on public sector units, lack of encouragement towards private sector, competition was lacking in our industries, and our goods did not fetch enough of export reserves and other things into our country. And at that time, the Gulf crisis that was there, now recently one of the surveys suggests that India is the 4th largest consumer of the fossil fuels, that is the petrol and other things. In 91, it is said that there was more than a 2 billion bill that was on crude oil imports that India had to make there. That was a big burden around. And the kind of policies that was taken, but at that time did not go about with working conducively to the Indian economy at that time. And the political instability that was there because of the VPC government, and then it was a caretaker government under Chandrasekhar at that time. And then later it was PV Narasimha Rao and others who had to go about with rejigging the entire thing at that time there. And if you go about with looking at the social part of it, the changes that had happened in the tastes and preferences, and over-reliance on some imports proved very costly at that time. Then there was things to do with overvaluation of our currency that was said to be one of the reasons that were there. And all these things had gone about with having an impact, and that resulted in the balance of payments crisis that had happened in 91. And the new industrial policy that was there was trying to correct these kind of things that had gone about crept into the system there.
Exactly, sir. So, sir has allowed us to, given us an opportunity to, he has given an overall view of, in a nutshell, what has happened and that BOP crisis, the reasons behind it. Thank you so much, sir. Satyanarayana, sir, can you explain us the meaning and role of structural reforms?
Reforms have 2 angles. and economic reforms were undertaken mainly to contain the demand and increase the supply, and structural reforms are also known as supply side management. So, the objective of structural reforms is to increase the supply of goods and services in the economy. As we have discussed earlier, the earlier policies of the government resulted in restricted supply in the economy. So, one, private sector was not supplying to the extent it had to supply, and public sector was not functioning to the extent it was expected to function, and we were not getting foreign technology, foreign goods, etc. Foreign capital was also not coming. So, because of this the supply was restricted in Indian economy, and that resulted in inflation. So, government wanted to manage the inflation through structural reforms. So, structural reforms are aimed at improving the supply, and all the topic of today's discussion, LPG, is what we call as structural reforms. So, liberalizing the private sector so as to make it contribute towards the development of the economy by supplying more goods and services. 2, to reform the public sector through several measures, either privatizing the units or providing more autonomy to the public enterprises and to improve their performance. So, we wanted to improve the supply of goods and services by the private sector. The third thing is by allowing the foreign capital and by liberalizing the imports so as to increase the exports. We wanted to make the foreign capital to play a big role in increasing the supply of goods and services in the economy. So, these are these three put together, that means liberalization, privatization and globalization put together, we call them as structural reforms, and they are also known as supply side management.
Sir, I think we seem to have received a phone call, so we will take it. Yes sir, please tell me, who is online? Hello? Can you tell us your name, sir?
Vijay.
Okay, Vijay, tell us which question you want to ask. Please tell us your question.
I'm Vijay from Vijayawada.
Okay. What is the question?
The question is little clarification, madam, about the economy, Indian economy.
Yes.
Question is, we have the Indian economy,
Yes.
we have the RBI,
Okay.
we have the banks.
Okay.
Banks are nationalized.
Okay.
Now the question is, my question is,
Yes.
why can't the RBI and the government increase the bank rate little bit, 1 or 2%, not 6%, at least 7%, 8%, so that there won't be much consumption on the gold, and there will deposit in the bank, and the RBI amount can be raised. Every bank can have its own hold of the money.
Okay. Thank you, Vijay. We will answer that question for you.
Here, in our Krishna district, some of the cooperative banks have done the bank rate as 10%.
Okay. You want the bank rate to be reduced or increased?
Increased.
Increased.
Okay, we'll
Acha.
answer.
There won't be much consumption on the gold and other activities.
Acha. Okay.
Increased.
Acha. Okay.
Mr. Vijay, now the
Yes, sir.
bank rate has no relevance because everything is done through repo rate and reverse repo rate. So, RBI is managing the interest rates, that means the rate at which banks borrow from RBI and the rate at which banks deposit money with RBI, those rates are called the repo rate and the repo rate, reverse repo rate respectively.
Yes, sir.
And by increasing or decreasing the repo rate and reverse repo rate, the RBI manages the interest rates in the economy. And the RBI has been consistently increasing the repo and reverse repo rates. Only during the last 1 or 2 monetary policies, the repo and reverse repo rates were not increased. Otherwise, during the earlier monetary policies and during Mr. Subba Rao's regime, repo and reverse repo rates were increased 13 times.
Yes.
So, that the objective of this is to contain inflation. So, to reduce the money supply and contain inflation, and they have helped us in reducing the imports of gold also. and gold imports have been substantially come down because of the policies of the government, and this is only one of the things. The other things which the government has undertaken was to increase the customs duty on gold, and not to they were not allowing banks to import gold directly, and so many measures they have taken, and they helped in reducing the gold imports.
Exactly, sir. Thank you so much. So we
If I
seem
can
to
add one thing to what
Yes,
he
sir,
has said.
please, sir.
With the changes that were being brought in, he was trying to link up RBI playing a role and all he said there. Now RBI was a regulator earlier, but now if you go about looking in the current scenario, it's not playing the role of a regulator, it's more of facilitation.
Sir.
So it is trying to ease the things that are there. So that's what sir had gone about with saying
True,
already.
sir. True, sir. Yeah, exactly, sir. So I think we seem to have received another phone call. We shall attend it. Yes, sir. Who is online? Hello.
Madam.
Hello. Tell us, sir. What's your name?
My name is Sridhar, madam.
Sridhar. Okay,
Sridhar, madam.
Okay, please tell us your question.
Udaipur, Rajasthan.
Okay. Please tell us your question, sir.
Udaipur, Rajasthan.
Yes, sir. Please tell us your question, sir.
Madam, I am asking regarding the inflation problem.
Yes, sir.
Already, sir, I explained so much on inflation.
Yes.
My question is, does corruption in India affects inflation or not, madam?
Okay, very good, sir. Nice question.
And one more thing is, generally what we hear in news and everything is that the politicians deposit this black money, everything in Swiss banks.
Yes, sir.
So can we restrict how to restrict this black money flowing to the Swiss bank? Can we restrict that the government? Is there any policy or plan so that the inflation may be decreased to some extent?
Okay, okay. So it was on how.
So he has raised an important thing
Yes, sir.
on which we can talk for hours together, but I would like to be very brief on this.
Yes, sir.
So parallel economy contributes to inflation because parallel economy means unaccounted money, which is not known to anybody. How much money is in circulation, and all those things are not known because it is not accounted for. So that causes inflation, but we cannot measure it. There is no way in which we can measure the impact of parallel economy on the inflation. That is one thing. The second thing is how much money is deposited by the people in Swiss bank or other banks. Nobody knows. Different estimates are there.
Yes, sir.
So government is taking several steps to bring back the money which is deposited by people in unauthorizedly deposited by people in Swiss bank and other foreign banks, and the process is on. And it is a long drawn process, and we cannot find straight away simple solutions to these problems unless there is a change, there is improvement in governance, and people realize the importance of corrupt free government. These things will not improve. Slowly the things are moving, but not at the expected pace. It may take some more time for us to reform these things.
Exactly, sir.
To add to it, if you look at what sir was saying about a parallel economy,
Yes, sir.
there is this accounted money and the unaccounted one.
Yes, sir.
Now through the underworld or through the corrupt practices of this unaccounted money is released into the economy, what happens is there's too much money chasing too few goods
Exactly,
there. So
sir.
prices shoot up.
Absolutely.
That would add to the inflation.
Exactly.
Now if you go about looking at Supreme Court, it had gone about with pulling the government and asking as to why efforts were not being made to get that money back from Switzerland and other places.
Yes, sir.
As Sarah said, it is a long drawn process that you have there. There's an element of confidentiality why people go about putting their money there. And now there is a serious concern that at international forums, people will go about raising their voice
Yes, sir.
to see that if this money is being brought in, I think it will go about with boosting the economy well.
Absolutely. And in fact, to add to that point, he was asking us if that money is bought back, what will happen to inflation? Will inflation be controlled? As rightly pointed out, inflation will shoot up even more than that. Because it is unaccounted money, it comes here, it's black money.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, it chases more money, less goods. So it increases inflation, it doesn't reduce inflation.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Now we will continue with our discussions, friends. And Sir Patrick, sir,
Yeah,
can you explain us the meaning of macroeconomic stabilization?
Now, if you go about looking at the policy environment, we look at the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, policy related with the industrial policy, and the trade policy, which is to do with the exports and imports. At a macro level, when the government and the central bank work in tandem to go about with seeing that the economy goes about in a smooth sailing way there, there are times that we get into a fix, in the sense that if you try arresting the inflation rates, the unemployment level shoots up. And if you try working on the unemployment, then the inflation rate shoots up. This is what in economics we call it as the Phillips curve. And there are efforts that you got to go about with having a balanced growth. And apart from it, you'll also talk about the sustained growth policy, wherein whatever resources are there available for the present generation, it is not that you would go about with doing it at the cost of the future generation. You don't go about with exhausting the resources where the future generation is in a wanting condition there. So these are the things which come under this macro level things, and I would like Sir to go about adding a few to it.
Yeah. So macro, as discussed, we have discussed about the structural reforms earlier, and when we were discussing that, I said that there are two sides to manage. One is demand side, the other one is supply side. Structural reforms are meant to manage the supply side of the economy, and macroeconomic stabilization is to manage the demand side of the economy. So the demand for goods and services increase because of several reasons. One of the important reasons is fiscal deficit. So when the government spends more than what it receives, so the money supply and the spending in the economy will go up. So that results in inflation. So we have to manage the fiscal deficit, and we should not allow it to go beyond a particular level. So beyond 5% it is unmanageable fiscal deficit. So every government is concerned about managing the fiscal deficit. They have targets for that. So that is one thing. The second thing is related one, you have to manage inflation. So unless fiscal deficit is properly managed, inflation cannot be managed. So the third thing is balance of payments. So how to manage the balance of payments? So unless we improve the exports, increase the exports and reduce the imports, we cannot manage the balance of payments, and we have to attract the foreign capital to our foreign money to bridge the gap between to manage the unfavorable balance of payments. Whatever the deficit that we have to meet it from the foreign money or NRI money, etc. So the reforms which are undertaken to manage the demand side of the economy are what we call as macroeconomic stabilization measures.
Excellently put, sir. So now, Satyanarayana sir, we have a lot of discussions on inflation till now. What could be the role of monetary policy in containing inflation, sir?
So when one of the callers has asked about that, so why can't the RBI increase the bank rate to contain inflation?
Yes.
So it is a very important thing that he has raised. That is exactly what the RBI is doing.
Yes.
Now the RBI has two important things in its mind while announcing its monetary policy. One, how to manage the inflation. The other one, how to manage the current account deficit or exchange rates, exchange rate of foreign currencies with Indian currency. These two are very, very important considerations for RBI to while announcing the monetary policy. So monetary policy helps in containing inflation, but monetary policy by itself cannot do wonders unless the government policy also is in tune with the monetary policy of the RBI. So unless our government contains fiscal deficit, whatever the measures that the RBI takes in managing the interest rates to contain inflation may not yield the expected results. So both fiscal policy and monetary policy, they should go together. So if both of them they have the same objective, then it will be very easy for the RBI to effectively utilize the monetary policy to contain inflation in the country.
Exactly, because normally people think and they keep hue and cry whenever inflation rises beyond a level, that what is the government doing in terms of RBI monetary policy is there, why is it's not working? So sir has a very good cue that RBI alone or monetary policy alone is not the magic wand. There are many things into it which have to together taken across for containing inflation. Thank you, sir, for that. Patrick sir, can you please explain us on the role of FDI in economic development, sir?
Yeah. Now when you look at this word economic development, what had happened is from 1947 to 1991, for the first time when one of the changes that was made is you are allowing the technology as well as the foreign investments to come into India. prior to it, sir has also said that we were suffering with what is called as xenophobia, that is fear of strangers. Now we were under the colonial rule for more than 200 years. People from Dutch or Portugal or from Britain had come with the purpose of doing trade with India. Under that guise, they ended up ruling the country and plundering it for more than 200 years there. So with that thing, what was seen is whenever there was some money which was coming from foreign, they always thought it to be a threat to the sovereignty, freedom and independence of this country. But after 91, a lot of things have changed. And one of the main things that was there in the LPG was trying to liberalize this foreign direct investments. And the foreign investment had come in through channels. One is to do with the FDI, another is FII, that is foreign institutional investments. Now if you look at the foreign direct investments, it is an investment of the foreign assets in the domestic structures, in the organizations. It is considered to be only in the primary market. It is considered to be fixed and it can't have a very quick exit kind of a thing there. And countries tend to use this basically to go about with enhancing the industrialization, developing the economy, providing gainful employment and other things. And this institutional investments on the other hand is investments that are made in the secondary market. It has got a free exit. It is through individuals and institutes which are not located in the domestic country, and that's how it goes on. And if you go about looking at, you have two kind of things where an RBI gives direct approval and another one that you have where you have the Foreign Investment Promotion Board that also involves in this FDIs and other things there. And it was seen that there were limits of 50 or 70, 74 and 100%. There are certain sectors where 100% FDIs are allowed. To quote one example, there's no fear of sovereignty loss and other things there. We had a telecom company by name Hutch, which belonged to the SR group, and later it became the Vodafone as of today. And an FDI that is permitted in the telecom sector is to an extent of 74%. And this Vodafone owns around 69% stake in that telecom. Now with the xenophobia that was there, we had a kind of a policy wherein if foreign investment had to come in, it was restricted to an extent of 49% and the domestic one was 51. But this had gone about with going for a big change around there. And surely it had contributed towards the growth of the economy. There are pluses and minuses, but it really went about with changing the real outlook of the economy.
Excellent, sir, excellent. Because even today people are afraid of FDI. Very recently we had FDI in aviation and there was such a huge hue and cry. Sir, I think we seem to have one phone call ready and we will attend it. Yes, sir. Please tell us your name, sir. Hello? 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 Hello, sir. Sir, please tell us your name.
I am Venugopal.
Okay, sir. Venugopal, sir. Please tell us your question. Yes, sir.
When restrictions are imposed and removed in the public sector, what is the same need to impose restrictions on public sector, madam?
When restrictions are imposed on public sector?
Restrictions are relaxed in private sector.
Okay.
What is the need of imposing, putting some restrictions on public sector, madam?
What is the reason?
No, I understood his question. What he says is, government wants to remove all the restrictions on private sector through liberalization measures. Why is it imposing so many restrictions on public sector? That's what he wants.
Discounting its profitability.
Pardon?
Discounting the profitability of public sector.
Oh, that's what I am. Now I understood your question. So I agree, I fully agree with you. There is no logic behind that. So in fact, had the government been so liberal towards private sector, they should have given more autonomy to public sector. So by giving freedom to public sector, we could have made many enterprises to make lot of contribution to the Indian economy. As I said earlier itself, there were so many reasons for failure of public sector. One of the important reasons is bureaucratic interference and lack of autonomy on the part of the managers. Audit is another important reason. Whatever that they do, that the same thing may be questioned at a later stage, and that inhibits the managers from taking decisions. So many such things are there. That is the reason why one of the important things which the government, many committees suggested to the government were, instead of privatizing the enterprises, handing them over to private sector, Why don't you think of liberalizing the public sector by operational measures? For example, one of the important things that they have done was corporatization. All the corporations were converted into companies to give more autonomy to private enterprise, and MOU concept they introduced. Then they introduced the concept called Navaratna, where freedom would be given to the important enterprise to make them world class enterprise. So many such things were attempted, but all of them were half hearted attempts. Government was not very sincere in reforming the public sector to contribute to the nation. And privatization is done, mostly disinvestment is done, mostly to reduce the fiscal deficit. And it was not done to improve the performance of the public enterprise. This is a very, very sad state of affairs. I fully agree with you.
Sir, for example, Indian Airlines is doing very well in domestic sector, sir.
That's what.
Indian Airlines is doing very well in domestic sector.
Not only that enterprise, many such enterprises are there where
it is a profitable organization.
Yeah, correct.
But after announcement of open space policy and implementation, Indian Airlines is in bad shape now.
I fully agree with you. So privatization by itself is not the solution to the problems of the public enterprises. Many public enterprises could have been made much more efficient by giving more autonomy to them. I agree with you.
Thank you, sir, for that nice explanation. Sir, I think we seem to have one more phone call in the queue. We shall take it. Yes, sir. Can you please tell us your name?
I am KVR Murthy speaking from Bangalore.
Okay. Please tell us, what is the question you would like to ask?
We have heard so many classic examples of countries which faced increase of inflation leading to crisis.
Yes.
I wanted to know some examples where the decrease of inflation beyond the optimal level also will cause crisis. Can you quote any countries where this was faced in?
No, the recent example of economic recession, that is the best example. Many countries they faced economic recession. So recession here it refers to the decrease in the production and fall in the consumption, etc. That also leads to a crisis situation, and we have witnessed, India also witnessed a recessionary phase, but in India unfortunately we had recession and inflation both together, which is known as stagflation.
Exactly,
so
sir.
this also may happen. So recession will affect, inflation will affect, and both together can also affect. That is what we call as stagflation.
Exactly, sir. Exactly. Sir, I think we have one more phone call ready. Yes, sir. Who is on the line? Please tell us your name, sir.
My name is T. Venkateswamy from Malkajgiri,
Okay.
Hyderabad.
Okay, sir. Please tell us what question you would like to ask us.
I want to ask this inflation and in this is going on in a topic.
Yes, sir.
Liberalization, globalization, all these things.
Yes, sir.
Will the political intervention
Yes,
in
sir.
these aspects
Yeah.
is not a part of the inflation? Does the political intervention in every field
Yeah.
in the system,
Yes.
financial system or in the global system, does it does not affecting the inflation of the country? That's I want to
Very good question. So governance is one of the important aspects for the development of any country.
Yes, sir.
So governance, unless the transparency is there in the governance, things will not improve. And when there is discretion to the government officials or politicians or bureaucrats, corruption will increase. When you have the power to sanction something, you expect something from the other party. So that is the reason why corruption is going up in India. So slowly we are moving to a transparent thing. So our reaction is mostly knee-jerk reaction. Whenever some crisis happens, whenever some corruption comes out, we take some steps to curb that particular aspect, and some regulatory mechanism will be introduced. For example, when capital market crisis is there, we have established SEBI. Like that, slowly the things are improving, but much more is required. Unless transparent governance is there, corruption cannot be rooted out from the country. So, and that is the most important thing. Politicians and bureaucrats should not have discretionary powers. So we have to move towards such a system which will result in improvement in the economy.
Yes, sir. I think we have one more phone
Hello?
call ready, sir. Yes, ma'am. Who is speaking?
Madam, I am Mahendra from Hyderabad calling.
Oh, yes, sir. Please tell us.
My question is regarding the allowing private entrepreneurs in the public sector projects through PPPs. private-public participation.
Okay.
See, madam, most of the infrastructural projects we are allowing the private parties to participate and develop, and then after to operate and to hand it over to the government under boot system.
Yes.
So the thing here is, the private, we at the point of taking up the project and the point of executing the project from the government side, there is no absolute control on the expenditure that is put forth and submitted to the government towards the cost of the project.
Okay.
And based on the cost that is being put forth by the agencies, we are allowing them the toll rate contracts and other ways wherein they can recover the cost from the operations that after the project is put to operation.
Okay.
So, in this way, they are recording the escalated costs for each project, and the government is allowing them to recover the escalated cost through the operation. So, over a period of 20 years or 25 years, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So, in this way, to what extent the concept of PPPs is really contributing for the welfare of the economy? We are allowing the private sector to get undue benefit by not having an efficient and effective control at the time of executing the project.
Okay.
There are some problems in public-private partnership. You have rightly pointed out, one of the problems is escalating the cost and recovering it for a long period. That may be there. We don't have any data on that. But the thing is, the infrastructure, we require crores of rupees, lakhs of crores of rupees are required to develop the infrastructure in the country, particularly roads, airports, ports and so many other things. Unless we allow the public private sector to participate in a big way, it will be very difficult for the government to build the required infrastructure. If there are some problems in accounting and or in inflating the things, and they are there in every system, and we have to find ways to minimize those things, but simply because there are problems, we cannot do away with public private partnership and depend only on government to develop the infrastructure. That may not be a viable solution.
Absolutely, sir, because and in fact we can compare between the infrastructural development before 1991 and after that. So, that is a static example of the requirement of private intervention in the development of infrastructure in India. Sir, I think we have one last question which could be dealt with because of the Satyanarayana sir. Can you tell us what more is required to the country to take it forward through LPG?
One of the important complaints of the private sector or the foreign institutional foreign direct investors is that we have to move at a greater pace in liberalization measures, particularly in labor laws. We are lagging behind. Our labor laws are not in tune with the international labor laws. That is one area where we have to do a lot. And another one is land acquisition has become a major problem for the industry to establish the units, and we have to reform that also. Some measures are taken and some more need to be taken.
Thank you so much, sir. So, friends, we had the opportunity to listen to the thought process of our highly knowledgeable resource persons. And I think you would agree with me that we couldn't gauge the passage of time in the highly enriching discussions which followed, covering in and out of the topic. And we should also congratulate the way you have interacted with us, which has added more inputs to give us to the audience. And it has been ranging, the kind of discussions which were ranging from the reasons behind the reforms, its features, its benefits, and they went very highly technical into the areas of fiscal deficit, FDI, WTO, macroeconomic stabilization, and what we have to do again in forward to carry the Indian economy more in a much better position than it is today. So, it was like an overview of business environment that we had, and I take this as my privilege and honor to thank our eminent resource persons on your behalf. Friends, I would just say continue with your quest of knowledge, because knowledge is power, knowledge is strength, knowledge builds confidence. Thank you.